Thank you. I feel so privileged to stand before you here. I keep asking, who am I to be, listened to by thousands of people here? But I'll tell you my story. I was born in one of the most beautiful places on earth. Western Uganda was surrounded by banana plantations, beautiful natural landscapes, and a lot of greenery. I am the fourth born of 8 children. And although we didn't have much while we were growing up, we were relatively very happy and content. It was mainly because our mother had raised us with so much love, despite so many challenges. The challenges were because my father had a drinking problem that degenerated into alcoholism. And that left the burden of raising the 8 of us to my mother, who had no job, no property, had not gone to school. She had been raised in a refugee camp since she was 1 year old. The alcoholism also bred domestic violence, and my first activism was trying to defend my mother from that when I was barely 15. I love my father. When I grew up, I learned to look at him more as a victim of alcoholism than as a villain in our lives. But that still didn't change the fact that growing up was quite hard. I grew up with this desire to be a lawyer, to defend my mother and women like her, who were so many in our village, who were going through so much abuse of patriarchy and property deprivation. However, I didn't study law right away after high school because I couldn't afford it. I studied journalism, worked in the media for a few years before I enrolled for law. If there's anything my mother's experience had taught me was resilience. You can't do it now, but you can do it tomorrow. So I did the law degree and finished it. As I was pursuing the bar course, COVID-19 hit and were put under lockdown. Uganda had some of the strictest stay-at-home rules. Our government deployed more resources into forcing people to stay at home who had nothing to eat than into feeding them. Our president couldn't understand why it was hard for people to stay at home. He was shown on television demonstrating and weighing 1 kilogram of maize flour and showing how it can feed people. He also showed everyone that, you don't have to go outside to exercise. You can all run and exercise in your houses. He was talking to people who live in a 1-bedroomed house. Probably the kitchen is there, but he thought everyone had a home, a sitting room as spacious as his. Anyway, I was at home during that time, unemployed, having quit my job to pursue the bar course, which is a full-time course. I was at home idle, unemployed, and almost really depressed. I have 2 children. I was wondering how I will feed them without a job, without studying and completing. So I reluctantly turned to social media and started to comment about issues that were affecting Ugandans, and started to publish information. I was no longer publishing in the mainstream media where I had worked for 10 years. So some of the issues I had first talked about were issues that were also affecting me personally, but had also affected so many Ugandans for so long. Ugandans had just complained and nothing had changed. For instance, there's an issue that the bar course institution, where I was at that time, had been failing students deliberately. People were making money out of, failing thousands of students and forcing them to go back and redo the bar course and pay more money. It's an issue that had persisted for so long. It had driven so many students into depression and others on the brink of suicide. There was an issue of the national water company that was overbilling Ugandans, and the complaints had gone unheard. I collected information about these issues and shared it on Twitter, now X. And I was amazed at how much reaction it triggered. So many Ugandans spoke up, shared their experiences, and the pressure was so much that the stakeholders couldn't ignore the Ugandans they had ignored for so long. We registered significant reforms in that area. And for me, that was the turning point. I saw the impact that had eluded me for the 10 years I'd been in journalism, because we'd never have achieved the reforms we did in those sectors by writing an article in the newspapers. I had done that for so long and nothing had changed. We would never even have got it by going to court. The courts in my country do not work for the ordinary person. From that time, I realized the power of this digital public square, the power of people, the collective voices, and the change it can effect in the real world. That was, like I said, the turning point. I never looked back. I wrote about so many things and kept receiving so many messages from so many people asking me to raise problems they were facing on my platform. One day it is about someone whose land has been forcefully grabbed by a politician or by an army person. The next day, it's the parents, the families of political prisoners asking me to raise it on X, on that platform, to see if they can get any change. Or another person who has been, forcefully terminated and wrongfully terminated from a job. There have been so many. The Minister of Justice in our country recently referred to me as a fully fledged court at a public event. Yeah, that was our Minister of Justice, accepting that his department has failed to dispense justice. And look, I am not a social media influencer. I don't get photo opportunities with Kim and Kanye like our president does. Neither do I have the luxury to tweet about invading a neighboring country like his son does. I am just a person who saw a platform that would expose our very, very shameless leaders that are not there to serve the people, but are there to loot, to trample on our rights. And we saw that only in exposure. They know you would never get anything out of them by taking them to the very courts that they rule and dominate. As a trained lawyer, I understand the importance of evidence. As a journalist, I understand the need for verification. So many Ugandans have seen me as a source of credible information on a space like X, where everyone writes whatever they want, with no filters, no gatekeepers. And that's why they come to me with this information, and we have grown that platform. We have grown that social media movement. In June 2022, for example, a whistleblower came to me with information that our parliament had procured 2 cars for the speaker and the deputy speaker at an inflated price of $640,000 from a briefcase company in the UK. They had flouted all the procurement laws. This was at the time when many Ugandans were struggling to feed. In fact, many were dying of hunger in the northern part called Karamoja. Around the same time, the president had been on TV telling Ugandans to be frugal, tighten their belt. If they cannot afford bread, they should eat cassava or something. But these were our leaders procuring 2 cars at worth an amount that could probably feed so many children. And this was just one instance of the wasteful expenditure and extravagance of our leaders. In a country where over 70% of the population lives under $2 a day, we have MPs that earn higher salaries than those in the European countries from where we get aid. And that's not to speak of the so many allowances for sitting in parliament, for their housing, for their cars, and all that stuff. In the current budget of this current financial year that we start in the next month, the money allocated to the leadership of parliament for footwear and clothing, for example, is more than double the money that has been allocated to 84 schools. Not to speak of how much we spend on our president, both his office, the president's office, and his residency, the State House. It's at least $185 million every financial year. And this is while the state of resources, the quality of life of Ugandans is getting worse and worse. Take the example of our roads in the capital city, Kampala, for example. Yes, what you're seeing on the screen are not gardens, it's roads in the capital city. When a friend and colleague of mine, cartoonist Jimmy Spire Sentongo, last year called upon Ugandans and said, let's do a Kampala pothole exhibition where everyone shares photos of potholes with all shapes and sizes, to embarrass this government, to show that the Ugandans did a good job, planted bananas in them. Some were fishing in them to show that, we have roads where you can fish from. But it embarrassed the government. There was reaction from both the president and the Kampala Capital City Authority, and some little funds were sent to not do the roads, but to patch up these potholes, like put some maram, and tomorrow it is washed away by the rain anyway. But the exhibition really became so massive, and Ugandans kept asking, can we do more exhibitions in these other sectors? And I and other digital activists who had been working separately for so long joined Spire and did so many other exhibitions. And these, we call them exhibitions, but it's really, we are exposing rot and corruption and abuse of human rights and incompetency in so many sectors. So we did that, and the latest exhibition we've done was in February this year in Parliament, where we're exposing still corruption in Parliament. The effects of that exhibition are still unfolding. Recently, the UK and the US sanctioned the Speaker of Parliament over that corruption, among other officials. When the pressure was too much and some MPs tried to raise it on the floor of Parliament, the Speaker of Parliament said, I am not going to discuss social media rumors that are sponsored by homosexuals and agents of imperialists. In fact, the president supported her and said, us who were exposing that corruption are the real enemies of the country because we are agents of imperialists and homosexuals. You see, in our country, homosexuality is apparently the biggest problem. It's the biggest threat to the children. The same children whose feeding and healthcare and education they don't care about. It's such a big problem that recently our MPs passed a law punishing homosexuality with imprisonment and death. The other big problem is apparently social media misuse, which is also punished by 5 years. It was passed also about 2 years ago. And I'm not saying social media is not misused. It is so much misused that I have been a victim of that misuse, of abuse, of smear campaign, of slut shaming, and name it. But for us, social media is the only one avenue Ugandans have to express ourselves. In a country where the cost of physical activism is so high, it's met with bullets in the head, with detention, and all that. My friends and I, when we saw this need, started Agora, a digital platform to foster discourse, to amplify citizens' voices, to fight for human rights and accountability. We are a small team. We have barely existed for a year, but we have achieved so much. I can't imagine how much more we would achieve with the support of all of you, with experiences and ideas, and with resources. We also face so many threats. So many threats. I drive at home many nights thinking this is the last night I'm driving at home, or this is the last day I'm seeing my children. But the biggest threat so far that we have not yet found a way around is the threat of how to keep our platform open, our digital square open, because we know that as day follows night, there will be efforts to close it down. Like Facebook was closed, like the internet was shut down in the 2021 elections. I therefore appeal to all of you to help us with ideas, if you know, on how to keep the only public square that Ugandans have open. Thank you.